You own a small business, and it ain't easy, and it may be going okay. Or you could be stuck and barely making ends meet. It's about time for a pivot. Welcome to Small Business Pivots. It's time for you to generate some cash, some real cash. How does $1 million sound? Only 9% of small businesses earn over $1 million annually. But your host is a business coach and an entrepreneur. And we're going to talk to the small business owners who've done the $1 million and more. It's time to be inspired. Welcome to the 7-Figure Club. This is Small Business Pivots. And now your host, Michael Morrison.
I am your host, Michael Morrison. I am a passionate small business coach who helps small business owners who are working hard and not getting anywhere. Having owned numerous businesses myself, I've walked in your shoes and know from personal experience the things that you need to know to build and scale your business. If you'd like to explore how a small business coach could help you and your small business succeed, go to my webpage, www.michaeldmorrison.com. And if you want to schedule a free consultation with me to learn more about how a small business coach could help you, click the button in the top right-hand corner. Or if you'd like just additional resources for your small business success, check out my other company, Boss. The URL for that company is www.businessownershipsimplified.com. There you will find small business resources for online classes, master classes, books, additional coaches, culture building tools and exercises, networking events, and much, much more. Our guest today is Pete Sena. Pete is a creative entrepreneur and forward-obsessed business builder. As founder of Digital Surgeons, which is a forward-obsessed brand experience consultancy, Pete designs results-driving strategies that unlock new possibilities and growth for ambitious brands and businesses. For nearly 20 years, he has built and led cross-functional teams that have delivered innovative, bottom-line boosting activations and multi-channel programs, ranging in scale from venture-backed startups to Fortune 500 organizations. His thinking, teams, and work have impacted some of the world's leading brands and corporations, including, but not limited to, Pepsi, Walmart, Google, Microsoft, American Express, PayPal, MasterCard, and many, many more recognizable brands from around the world. So, let's get to our guest and learn the pivots he made to build his empires. All right, welcome guest again to another Small Business Pivots episode where we interview successful entrepreneurs that have been successful and learned and adapted to some pivots along the way. And so today we have another special guest, Pete Sena. How are you today?
Good to be here. How you doing?
I'm doing great. What part of the world are you coming to us from?
I'm dialing in from New Haven, Connecticut on the East Coast.
Fantastic. So I always like to start off with a question because we kind of work backwards. But if you were to tweet or say a tweet right now, where would you say you are in life, business? What would you say that looks like today?
Wow. I'm in the messy middle.
Yeah.
If I was writing a tweet, I'd probably have ChatGPT do that for me, but
Exactly.
I'd probably say something like, I'm currently in the messy middle with a clear vision for what the next steps look like. And I'm really excited for the future and grateful for the past.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. I love hearing different business owners kind of where they're at, their tweet, if you will, because it really makes us stop and think, where am I actually? So
I also love the character limit too, because if you're like, give us a paragraph, it's like, no, give us a tweet. And it's like, I do tweet a lot. I'm pretty active.
Oh, do
on
you?
Twitter. So I was like, what would that tweet be?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a tweeter, so so it's all new to me. I just short and simple. So I also know from interviewing a lot of small business owners that are successful now, we know it always hasn't been a clear path, kind of what
For
you
sure.
talked about, your vision. It is kind of the messy middle. I'm kind of in that space as well, but I do have clarity, but it wasn't always that way. So I know for small business owners, a lot of times we have this mindset that I'm never going to get to this level, or that person is successful, but I can't do that, or how did they do that and not me? So we're all relatable as human beings. And so I kind of like to take a little journey back just so we kind of learn some of the upbringing that you had, so that if someone else can relate to that, it's like, hey, Pete did this, you can do it too. So kind of gives them some hope. So what is your childhood look like? Any trials, tribulations, anything like that?
Wow. We're going back.
Yeah.
So
Put our thinking cap on now.
yeah, let's do it. So I had a pretty good childhood. Grew up um, really kind of a student of the internet is the way I would describe myself, in terms of like, I was always really into like computers and technology and just like tinkering. I was a real shy kid growing up. So, super introverted, didn't know until later in life, but like had ADHD and was sort of like, didn't do things. I didn't work in a straight line in terms of the way that my brain learned things and did things. So did a lot of tinkering, very kinesthetic visual learner in terms of that. So like early on when all the other kids were playing sports and doing that kind of stuff, I was like, in my parents' basement, like tinkering on a computer. And now I'm still, in the basement tinkering on a computer. It's just in my house. And
right. And you get paid for it.
yeah, and I get paid for it, probably more than I should. But yeah, so that's that's sort of the first thought that comes to mind. But I don't know if that answers the question.
It actually does. And I would say for the majority of business owners that I've interviewed for this podcast thus far have all been introverts. And I find that very interesting, because that's one of the key words, it seems like, that I hear most often, that I was an introvert, and I was too. But as a business owner, that's the complete opposite of being an introvert, because now you're the face of a company. You have to put yourself out there. How did you kind of overcome that? Or was it just kind of a learned behavior? You just forced yourself? Was there any special, because I know a lot of people, they want to own a business, but they tell me, I just don't know if I can, because you have to go to networking and you have to socialize and all that. So what were some tips that you could give somebody like that?
Well, a couple of things. One, I don't think you have to do any of those things to be successful, to be totally candid. We'll come back to that. And I'll challenge all those assumptions. But I would say, I know a lot of people, many of which run $100 million or $1 billion companies and lead them extremely successfully, and they're highly introverted. So I think that like there's a scale of how we present from a personality perspective, from introvert to ambivert to extrovert. So I think that a lot of times labels like that are limiting. But not only was I an introvert, meaning that I recharge in my own thoughts and by being by myself, but I was also really shy. And early on in my career, to answer your question, I really lacked a lot of confidence. And I lacked a lot of confidence for a million reasons that I'm sure my therapist would tell you if you called her. But for me, I'd say what I was always really uniquely equipped with was vision. I would always see things that didn't exist, whether it was like a design or a program or software or a company. And I would just sort of see that thing in my head, and I would just tinker until that thing came true. And I think that I didn't realize it, at that point, but that was really sort of, I think, an early skill set that popped in my head that I think gave me the ability to shape outcomes for both myself, the people around me, and now for my clients. So I think that was the big sort of thing for me, is like realizing that you evolve over time and you can still stay true to who you are. And there's a lot of ways to get to the finish line, right? So like, for example, like about networking, like in the early days, like I used to hate going to these networking things because I thought I had to. Yeah. And I would go to them and they were awkward, and like you in a room, and like people are either trying to like sell you at that time, it's like someone's trying to sell me insurance or like be my tax guy or whatever it is. And like, I'm just sitting there going like, what the hell is this stuff? You know what I mean? And I was like super shy, and they were just so awkward. So then I took to where I knew best, which was the internet. right? And I was in like at that time IRC chat rooms. Nowadays they would be Discord chat rooms or Slack rooms or groups, whatever.
Yeah.
And I met a lot of really cool people that way on message boards, on forums, and that turned into a lot of business for me. And then obviously over the years using different platforms like LinkedIn or Twitter, that turned into business for me. So I think that like the one thing that I think is the most important, it's the hardest thing to know when you start a business is yourself. And I think when you know yourself, you can achieve incredible things. And that level of self-awareness, I think, is what helps you to understand how you show up and occur to other people. And in my case, in the early days, the way I was showing up and occurring to other people is like really shy and like lacking confidence. And I think that like that over time were different skills that I had to develop. But overall, I think that like there's a lot of this like conventional wisdom that's out there that I just think is complete crock of shit. Like I think, I know a lot of successful people that don't follow the playbooks that everybody else does. So I think that that's the problem with like what I call Instagram culture, which is where like we think that life is all about private jets and all this amazing stuff we see on Instagram, when the reality of it is there's a whole world beneath that doesn't exist that you don't realize. I joke around a lot about Kim Kardashian, right? Where it's like everyone looks at her and says like, yeah, she's got it made, but like she's still to this day grinding her butt off to like really be successful in everything that she does. So like we can look at these celebrities and sort of cast blame or cast thoughts on what we think that they are. But the reality is that everyone wants, not everyone, but a lot of people want what they have.
Right.
They want the followers, they want the blue checks, they want all the things that these people have, but not a lot of people want to do the work.
That's it.
And like for me, like I never had a problem doing the work, and I still don't have a problem doing the work. I mean, here I am on a Friday weekend coming up ahead of us, and I'm carving out time to have a conversation with you because I love connecting with business owners like yourself and helping to inspire other people, because here we are doing the work, right? So like just showing up is like more than 50% of getting the job done, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I've got a friend that has a brand new, we'll say a 6-figure vehicle. And when you talk about that perception of, I see these people on Instagram having this and having that, he tells me that almost once a week, someone will reach out to him to offer to pay him if they can take pictures with his car.
Yep.
That should be to me, that's like shows you that what you see is not always what they have. And I was also, I think it was Richard Branson or somebody. No, I'm pretty sure it's Richard Branson. He's wealthy. He has an island to himself, but then nobody sees the 3 hours of depositions that he's going through because he's getting sued every single day, for his money. And, we just don't see that behind the scenes. And we only see, I think it was Darren Hardy that says we only see like 2% of people's successful lives. That's the part that we want to live, but we don't see behind the scenes. And so it's very interesting that you commented on that as well.
I love that quote. That's cool. Yeah. That's a cool one. I'm gonna write that one down.
Yeah. Did you go to college by chance?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
I went to University of Connecticut. But I would say that my college life did not contribute to my business in any way. And that's funny because now I do a lot of work with and for UConn.
Yeah.
But while I was there, they gave me zero help in any sense of the way, despite the fact that I was building at the time, $1 million business in my dorm room there.
Yeah.
And while everybody that was on campus was out getting drunk and, chasing partners and all that kind of stuff, I was building, I was building, I was doing work for clients, I started that business in my dorm room and grinding. I was grinding then, I'm still grinding now. And the only difference is now I've got a little bit more leverage than I did back then, but it's, the game has changed, the game's evolved, but it's still the same Pete the Geek.
So let's talk. I know business owners, they all want to hear pivots and tips and advice. And you've already brought up some nuggets. You mentioned you're going to challenge the mindset of being an extrovert or getting out and meeting people. So let's talk about your business, because let's talk about some pivots, how it started. I know where you are today. For most business owners, that's not how it started. We had to bootstrap. We had to, eat ramen noodles if we needed to. We had to haul. Yesterday, the guest I had on the podcast, she had to haul her product in her car and drive hours every day to distribute it. And those are things people don't see. So let's talk about that. How'd you get your start, and talk about your business a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So nowadays I have interest in a lot of different businesses. So I tell people, like, think of me like a pie chart, right? About 30% of my world is being an investor. About 30% of my world is being like a fractional chief marketing officer for different businesses or brands, where I'm helping them build out, take the vision, bring it to life, build a team, that sort of thing. So really going in there and shaping that. I'd say probably about another 30% of my life is in contributing to the brand transformation agency that I started back in college called Digital Surgeons. So that's about 30% of my life. And then the other parts and percentages that of it. And I say my professional life. I mean, obviously, of course, first and foremost, my most important job on the planet is being a father. My second most important job on the planet is being a husband. So my third most important job is being an entrepreneur. And that wasn't the case for most of my life. For most of my life, it was work, and then work. And so I've made some changes over the time. But that being said, in terms of where I got started from, so Digital Surgeons has been the kind of power plant that I think most of what I've achieved in my life from a professional perspective has been made possible by. I think of it like a power plant, think of it like a flywheel. So what that company was in the beginning was, I want to make cool shit for the internet. So making cool shit for the internet meant I was designing things, I was coding things, I was building things, apps, websites, that sort of thing. You name it, if it lived in the internet, I probably tinkered with it or built it or had a client doing it for some time, right? So I say that not from a place of cockiness or even pride, but just from a place of like, that was life, right? It's like one day you're building a website for a local dental office. The next day you're doing a banner campaign for MTV. And these were two real things I worked on, right? So in the beginning, it was just like making cool shit for the internet, a lot of web design. And, we were doing that. And then you do one good project, you get a referral. You do another good project, you get a referral. So one of the most important things I would say to any business owner, no matter what business you're in, is the single greatest gift that any of your customers can give you is a referral. Amen. The single greatest way to get a referral is to ask for referrals. And you don't have to be like salesy when you do it. You just basically say like, hey, like, Michael, you're really happy with the work that we did for you. Like, do you know anybody else that is facing some similar challenges that what we do can help them? And you're like, yeah, you got to talk to my cousin Ted or Susan. And before you know it, Susan's calling me. And now instead of me having to spend all this time in the corner of a networking event at some awkward chamber of commerce, and I was at those back in the day, or slugging Facebook ads or TikTok ads or Instagram ads to get people to buy into us. Now you got built-in trust, right? What I tell people is, I didn't know this back then, right? Back then I was just a shy kid. I was afraid to sell myself. I was afraid to get the value that I know I can create for people. It's like, what I know now is you got to get people to know you. Then you got to get people to like you. Then you got people to trust you. And then only then will people actually buy from you, whether you're a solopreneur or Coca-Cola, right? So that is essentially what I help people do. So back then it was just a lot of like slogging websites, doing different design things. And then what I realized was, at that time, every touch point was digital, right? So people were discovering brands. Again, I got started before social media was really big, right?
So what year time frame was this about?
2004, 2005.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was like really like, I remember like, I put Edible Arrangements, which, is just called Edible now. It's the national company. We put them on Facebook. We started their first Facebook page account. We built Facebook apps for them when that was still a thing, right? So definitely been at this game for a while. I mean, the certainly this light in the background makes me look a lot younger. So I mean, that was like the big thing. And we did that for, almost 10 years. Just, you get an account, you get a bigger account, you get a bigger account, you hire some people, you get a bigger account, you hire some people. There's a lot of pivots over the years, where my co-founder and we found ourselves in some tough situations, where we had to, bet the farm, right? We had to personally guarantee our houses and personally guarantee, those types of things to get the credit lines and the business lines of credit and those kinds of things. So, we've all been through those stories. Got some good, highs and lows. What I always like to say, and we talk about on our podcast, Forward Obsessed, is that business is like a roller coaster, right? You got your ups, you got your downs. And I think the people who make it to the end are the ones that understand that it's going to go up, it's going to go down, and you just got to roll with the punches, right? And that, I think, is just like the thing that I've never given up. I won't give up. And now the table stakes are higher for me, right? Now I've got more employees. I've got a family now. I've got multiple mortgages now.
Yeah.
And I think at that point, it's like, yeah, I'm tired as hell, but at the end of the day, I'm super grateful for what I've built. And I think that being mindful of where you are in the journey is really easy to say now, but it's really hard to do when you're in it. And I think that level of self-awareness, that level of being present is things that I see a lot of people missing. When I talk to folks, it's like they can be a bit delusional because they fall so in love with their business. They're so focused on it. They can't see the flaws, right? It's kind of like no one's going to call their baby ugly,
Yeah, right. Yeah. I have a quote that I discovered and wrote for myself. It's kind of my daily mantra that really helps with my mindset because, like you said, it is a roller coaster. And I used to be so wrapped up in my businesses that I had. And I finally discovered, I was like, I'm going to write a mantra that will give me some peace. And it's every day is an exciting adventure with problems to solve and memories to be made. And if I go into every day knowing there's going to be a problem but I can solve it and move on. I mean, there's nothing better than solving a problem, right? And because that just sets you on that's like a dose of dopamine right there. When you plow through it. I want to ask real quick, because I know we have a lot of small business owner wannabes, I guess, but they just haven't taken that plunge. You did it in college. What was the spark did it just happen, or that was something that you did by accident and just turned into a business? How did that get started?
Yeah. So it's funny. Like when you ask me like what I am as a business person, it's like my first answer is a creative entrepreneur. And if you asked me back then what an entrepreneur was, I was like, that sounds like some weird French word.
Right.
I can't spell that. I still can't spell it. Thank God for spell check now. But like, but back then, I think for me, I just wanted to make cool shit for the internet. And I was at an impasse. I had a job at a big sports marketing company back then, and I could design and I could code. And the story I've told a number of different times in a number of different places is I met a fork in the road. And the fork in the road was like, Pete, you're going to be a designer or a developer. And I was a young, pretty immature and kind of rebel-like kid at the time. I'm in my 19, 18. Yeah. So I was definitely like very rebellious. And I was like, screw this corporate ladder thing. Like you're not going to label me. You're not going to let me do this or that. I'm going to be and it's funny, 20 years later, if you look around like some of the spaces we have now, because we've got a big kind of co-working space, whatever, you'll see ampersands in different places. You'll see ampersands in my house because the concept of an ampersand, the concept of kind of two things coming together, creating that kind of fusion thing is what's really driven my career. So I didn't have these dreams of grandeur to like launch this business or be the things that I am today. Many of that just happened organically. In the beginning, I was just like, I'm not going to be told to do this or that. I want to do both. And, it's common now to do both creative and tech things. But back then it wasn't. Back then you had the engineers on the left side. It's like a Sadie Hawkins dance, right? Girls on one side, boys on the other. It's like back then it was like, that's how it was with companies. And I just was not about that. So I wanted to do something different. And you hear the word status quo used a lot in business, right? Like disrupt the status quo. And like, for me, it's just like, no, like this. So this is how it works. And then I lived in Connecticut, right? So it wasn't like I wasn't in Palo Alto or one of these places where I could walk down the street and see what I wanted to be. It didn't exist. Right. And I kind of lived in my own little bubble in my small town. And the internet was like this vast sense of possibilities for me. And, the deeper I got into that, the deeper I realized that so much more was possible than what I thought was possible. And that ultimately was where I decided, you know what, I'm going to run my own business. And then I had this weird twist of fate where at that particular job, a friend of mine at the job told me that I could fill out this form. And if the form got approved, I could become a vendor. I didn't know what the hell that meant. And I could get this thing called a 1099. Again, things I didn't know at the time. Right. And I'm like, what does this stuff mean? Oh, wait, I got to hold back taxes and all. I mean, you didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't go to business school. Right.
No.
And then that's really where Digital Surgeons was born. And people always ask me, well, Pete, where'd the name come from? And it's like, well, I was basically going into people's businesses and looking at their websites and their apps and their digital experience. I was doing surgery on it, right? No different than when somebody goes in and says, hey, I want a facelift, or I want this to be bigger or smaller or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we were doing for businesses and brands. And I didn't know at the time, but like, that's where like the digital surgeon in me was born. And, nowadays we go by the name DS. It's sort of like the loving way that we've kind of shortened it. Because like everyone's going to, it's like not Dunkin' Donuts anymore, just Dunkin'. It's not this. Before you know it, we'll just see the green symbol. It'll represent Starbucks. But Yeah, right. But everything's simplification. So yeah, that's how it all began. I just want to make sure that the audience knows that, like, whether you're listening to this and you already have a business or you're thinking about starting one, don't overcomplicate it. Like listen to your heart, listen to like what's right for you. And some people have a lot of risk tolerance. Some people don't have a lot of risk tolerance. There's a million and one different ways to start a business. You ask 100 business owners for advice, you're going to get 101 answers, right? So
Oh,
the
yes.
reality is you got to do what's right for you. And at that time, that was what was right for me. And, again, that's the path I took. It was a lot of sleepless nights. There's still sleepless nights to this day. But you lose sleep over different things, right? You think back then the things that mattered are not the things that matter now. And that's just growing up, growing up as an entrepreneur, growing up as an individual, growing up in general. So yeah, that's the story. I wish there was a more glamorous, like, lightning struck the top of the tower and I said to myself, I must start this business, but I don't have one of those for you.
With a scalpel.
Yes,
since you're a surgeon.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me, you made a great point. No one's ever brought that up. You made a great point by saying you grew up in your business. What were kind of those stages? Because there are so many myths out there for business owners. It's kind of like when you're fixing to have your first child and you see all those at the end of the racks with the baby smiling on the magazine and the mom looks happy. That's not what it's like. Okay. So it's the same thing with owning a business. What would you say those stages of growing up that you discovered, if you can recall?
So I can give you So there's a really good mental framework for this that I'm going to teach some folks here today. Because when I learned it, I was like, shit, I wish I learned that back then. Right.
Yeah, I know. There's so many of those. I have too.
Oh my God. Right. So there was a psychologist by the name of Bruce Tuckman. Right. And Bruce Tuckman came up with this model, which is FSMP. And it stands for forming, storming, norming, performing. And then what comes after performing, typically, which they don't talk about, is mourning, right? So what's interesting is when you think about when you're starting a company, right? No matter what kind of company, whether you're a landscaper or a software architect or building the next coaching business, which sounds like one of the things that you've got, right? You've got to come up with that formulation stage where you're forming things together, right? And then you're sort of like storming the castle and you're just kind of chasing something down. You're trying some different things to see what sticks, right?
Yeah.
And then some norms start to show up, right? Okay, so this is how we manage a client because we've messed that up a bunch of times, or this is how we should properly do this thing in our business. Like, what's the system that makes sense for us, right? You go from chewing gum and strings and cans to something a little bit more sustainable and system-based, right?
Yeah.
And that's that norming phase. And then you're performing, right? You're kind of running. You can look at that same cycle for when a sports team comes together. Or you can look at that cycle when a relationship comes together, right? So that mental model is really, really helpful for me. They teach that in things like Six Sigma and a bunch of fancy business books that I've read because I had a chip on my shoulder. I was around a bunch of smart MBAs for most of my life. And I was this broke kid that grew up and didn't know any of this stuff. So most important thing you can do when you're trying to build a business is learn the language of business and the language other people speak. Because when you speak the same language, we understand and get each other. When I started using some of those fancy words to the right people, I went from closing contracts that were $2,000 to $200,000 to $2 million. And that's where I think I moved myself up the proverbial ladder, right? All along the way, still on the hamster wheel, right? So that was a mental model that worked for me as I think about my business. When my co-founder and I got together, I was running it for a couple of years by myself before I brought him in. He's really kind of like a sales maven, like a just really smart, strategic guy, like very lovable. Everyone likes him. And he can sell water to a well. And he's just extremely gifted. He's so much more than a salesperson, but he taught me the value of great sales. One of the biggest and most important skills that no matter what kind of business you have is, I think, super valuable is your ability to sell yourself and sell your business. I hated salespeople. I was like, salespeople just talk. They don't walk. They don't do anything. I didn't understand the value of it. And now I just, I've ate crow a lot on that. I've apologized for that. I've evolved from that, but it was just my mental model, right? It's like, when we don't know how to do something, it can kind of diminish us a little bit if our egos get in the way, right? So that forming, storming, norming, performing model that I mentioned is kind of how I think about the stages of growth for digital surgeons. And if I were to sort of attach it to the people and the years, right? The forming was like me with my childhood friend that I hired as a developer. And then we did some work together. And then I brought on my business partner who started to help us sell stuff. So that now we're storming and we're getting some stuff figured out. And like, oh shit, we don't have enough developers or designers or account managers. And now we're hiring people. For the audience that doesn't know, my core business was a branding and marketing agency, just to kind of simplify that for the group here. So then we're adding all the different factions you need, data this and software that, and all the things you need to run an agency, operations, finance, et cetera. I didn't know what these models were. I didn't have business books, or I didn't have a coach like you at the time that kind of helped me through stuff, right? Which is why I think coaches are really incredible. And then from there, you're growing up. You go from, one person to 5, and then 5 to 10, and then 10 to 30. Obviously the slog is a little bit more than I'm just describing here so quickly, but then what ends up happening is then you kind of hit a wall sometimes, right? Remember, we got to like 15 people, and we almost ran out of money, and we were making some big ambitious decisions, and and there was some mourning period that went there. Some great team members said, okay, I'm ready to move on to my next thing. Some people started to say, you know what, this isn't right for me. I'm going to go have children now. And I don't want to be in such a busy, chaotic type of business or industry. Or some people went on to big corporate, or, moved on to different things. Right. So now you're losing these great team members that replace these really integral people to your organization. And it's hard, right? Or you lose a really important client. You put too many eggs in that client's basket, and you lose that client, $1 million client. Or in some cases, everything's going great, but you got a bunch of big clients now. I remember we had some Fortune clients, and many of them weren't paying their bills on time. We had a client that was 110 days late. They owed us well over $1 million, and they're keep throwing more and more projects at us. And, the people that are stiffening us on the bill wasn't our client. It was their procurement department, their ops department. And these big companies, they get trained to do that. So that's where you learn the value of something called cash flow, right? Which I didn't know what cash flow meant. Like, I imagined it was like Scrooge with a bunch of dollar bills, but no, that's not what cash flow is apparently. But yeah, so these are the things, the learning lessons, the forming, the norming, the storming, the performing stuff that, I haven't used that model in a while to describe it. But I think if you were to sort of growth chart the years, in terms of what that trend line looked like, I would say like every time it got really messy, we were moving into a different point in that journey. So I hope that's helpful for the audience.
Oh, that's huge. I've not heard that framework before, or that analogy, but that's perfect. But I also like how you said you learned, and I have a quote, learn to earn. Yeah. And a lot of business owners, it's okay. I always say, we don't know what we don't know. So I'm a business coach. I've been coaching for a long time, lots of small businesses, but even as a business coach, I have business coaches because I don't know everything.
Absolutely.
So the power of continuing to learn, I tell my kids that they're, older now, but I've always told them, because they would gripe about homework in school. And I was like, you're never going to stop learning. Like, I don't want to read this book. And I'm like, get used to it, because you need to read books the rest of your life. You're always going to be learning. There's always something you don't know. And for a lot of small business, I love how you put it that it's okay not to know.
Yeah.
Because and I have business owners that will tell me from time to time, they'll say, I wish I would have hired you years ago. And I'm like, I don't think you would have been ready then, because if you hadn't experienced 100%. All these bumpy roads, this stuff that I'm coaching you or teaching you, it wouldn't make sense, or you wouldn't find value in it because you haven't experienced the negatives of not doing it a specific way. So learn to earn. I love that. So
I like that.
Tell me, so you branding and marketing. So I'm kind of shifting into another avenue, unless you want to talk about something else, because
no, I'm here for you and your audience, whatever's going to be most valuable for the group. I mean, I do these things. Listen, I used to get paid to speak at all these big conferences all over the world. And then I was on a small podcast one time, and I got reached back out to a couple of weeks later by the host, and it was like, hey, just want to say thank you so much. I've had so many people email me and say that something that you said really helped change this trajectory or whatever. That's why I do what I do, right? When I was first getting started, I didn't have, a pot to piss in, and no one was helping me. I was the first person in my family to go to college, first person in my family to start a business. Everybody else was blue collar in my world, right? So for me, like, I just want to help people, right? Like I believe that if I can just help one person change the trajectory of their life, it's going to put a ripple effect in the universe. And that's where I'm trying to just make sure that I can help as many people as possible, because I didn't have that when I was getting going. I couldn't afford a coach. I didn't even know what a coach was.
Yeah.
I thought coaches were people that tell you how to swing a golf club or throw a baseball, and I didn't do any of
Right.
that stuff. Right. So yeah, no caveats needed there. I'm here to talk about whatever's gonna be most valuable for you and your audience.
Well, I appreciate that, because the last few of our guests have been similar in offering help. I know when I started my first business over 2 decades ago, I would start looking when the newspaper was a big thing, or actually when it was a thing.
Sure.
They'd have a business section, and they'd always feature a business person in our community every Sunday. And so I just started reaching out to these people, cold call, saying, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, but it looks like you're successful. Would you mind having a coffee if I bought you coffee or lunch? Not one of them turned me down. So I say that so that our listeners know to reach out. There are people that want to help you if you ask, but you have to ask, right?
Yeah. No, 100%. I think what I love about today's world too is like, there is so much information available to people for free, right? That thing is the thing I think is magical, is like, what I say now is, and I learned this from Dan Martell, who wrote a great book called How to Buy Back Your Time. And he basically says, trade money for time, not time for money. And it's a really cool thing. And again, it's easy to say now because I can trade some money for some time. But back then, all I had to give was time. Right. So like what I would say to people right now is like, if you think you need a coach and you might not be able to afford one, or maybe you're not ready to take the step, just go on YouTube and start searching. What I will warn people to do is definitely do it from an incognito browser window, because otherwise you're going to start getting a bunch of like gurus swimming up in your Instagram feed saying like, I'm going to change your life with my coaching practice
in 5 days.
5 days. Give me all your money.
Right.
But those ads are so terrible. And I hate the charlatans out there, and there's a lot of them. But in all seriousness, there's some really good advice you can get from YouTube, really good advice you can get from Google. Find those that are in the position you want to be in, and listen to some of the advice that they have and try it out, right? Like, try it out from 10 different people and find the advice that works best for you. But again, do your own research, do what's right for you. But I wanted to put that out there because I just think that like sometimes people don't know where to start. And I think the best place to start is like Google. The best place to start is like, nowadays ChatGPT these days, but just do a search for something and just go down the rabbit hole and allow yourself to explore and figure out what pulls you closer to it and what pushes you far away. Right. So for me, early on, when I started looking for executive coaches, when I had hired some, I was really turned off by like the sleazy, salesy kinds of executive coaches. I was really turned on by the people who I had heard about. And I was like, you're a really good leader. And they're like, oh yeah, I have a great coach. Who's your coach? And I started hearing that same name a couple of times. Then I just reach out via email. And that person, I feel like the best scientists are in the lab. They're not on social media. So like for me, one of the things I wrestle with a little bit about is like, how much is the right dose of putting yourself out there? And that's why I waited so long. I mean, I've only been putting myself out there on social for maybe 2 years now, not even, because I'm like, back in the day, I wasn't trying to be one of these like influencers who's like taking selfie videos in their parents' basement being like, I'm an influencer, hire me. Like, I didn't feel like I had anything to offer at that point. So for me, it was like just grind, grow. But if I had to go back in time, what I would say is one of the first things I would do is hire a coach. One of the first things I would do is find somebody who has been there, done that, and figure out what I can learn from them that I don't already know. Because then you can speed up that growth trajectory, right? I probably could have taken that 10 years. Nowadays, if you said, Pete, I'm taking everything from you, you're going back to the beginning. Like, boop. I could turn that 10-year journey probably, and I'm not even saying this with like cockiness, I could turn that 10-year journey into a 2-year journey easily.
Oh, yeah.
No question. Because what it comes down to is being like, don't do all that shit. That shit's slow and messy and whatever. This is fast and streamlined. But again, hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned some good things about coaching, and I'm not plugging myself because I have coaches myself. And that's really 15 plus years ago when I hired my first one. The first thing I thought was, I wish I would have done this sooner. Yep. And then the second thing was, or what I learned was they did, what would you call it? Like rocket shipped me out, like faster. But I also learned if you're shopping or looking for a coach, I know a lot of small business owners, and I'm not talking about those that are well-established $100 million companies. I'm talking about grassroots, started in my basement type people, and I'm growing and I'm scaling. There is no right system. Like there is no step 1, step 2, step 3 for every business. And I want to caution, I'm not going to mention any names of books, but there are some great books out there, #1 bestsellers that kind of have this framework. And a small business owner just called this morning saying, hey, I'm reading this book and it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm like, well, because that's not made for a small business. That's for a company with a C-suite team, which has the resources where you can delegate. So when you were talking about just start exploring on Google, YouTube, take it all with a grain of salt. Like say, is that applicable to my business?
Amen, brother. Amen.
So I just kind of wanted to expand on that. Your marketing and branding.
Yep.
That is one of, I would say, with all the business owners we work with today, that is their #1 frustration is the internet. Any tips, advice that you can give our listeners on? I know that's a loaded question, but
yeah. So I have a lot of things to share. I think the most important thing is know who you are, know what your best customers look like, smell like, feel like, and then figure out the problem that you solve for those customers. What does your world look like? What does that customer's world look like before you? What does that world transformational look like different after you?
I like
and then
that.
what I always tell people is your story is your strategy, and how you express it makes a big difference, right? So what does that mean? Well, what that means is if I know who my audience is, and I'm not talking like women between the ages of 25 and 35 that, live in, suburbia. That is not an audience, right? What an audience is like when you can get really, we can talk about how to do that in a second. I can point people to a bunch of free links that they can go check out and toolkits that they can do for free, and not going to try to sell you anything. But the thing is, first know your audience, then know what makes you different and better, and then figure out a way to communicate that in a way that will resonate with your particular audience. And that's going to lead to a very, very big uplift in sales, in marketing, and in growth for your business. Because the best customer that you get tomorrow is going to be from the learnings that you had from your customer yesterday. And I'm hoping for folks that are listening, they've got at least one customer, right? Or maybe more. But I think that being able to get down to what some people call an ICP, or an ideal customer profile, or, there's a lot of buzzwords out there in marketing. So I'll try to skip past those today. But at a high level, it's like, know who your audience is, know what you offer, know what your the alternative is, right? So if I don't go with your product or service, what am I going to go with? Right? Sometimes for some people, the things that you offer, the competitor that you face is actually nothing. You're facing the fact that they're not going to do anything, right? So take a case of a business coach, right? Like most cases, business coaches don't compete with other business coaches. Business coaches compete with people that don't know the need or want our coach. Right. So indecision is a decision altogether, right? So that's where I think that's why you got to be known. Then you got to get people to like you. Then you got to get people to trust you. Then you can get people to buy from you. And then ideally, once they've bought from you and you deliver on the goods you said you're going to deliver on, then you can then ask for a referral, or you can ask for more things. So I would say that would be the basic piece of advice I would say to people. Now, if you want to get into the weeds on like landing pages and growth strategies and all that stuff, I'm happy to get into that because I do that all day. But at the highest level, what is branding? What is marketing? It's being able to go out and find the people that need and want your product or service, find them, convince them that why your product or service is going to help them, and then figure out a way to move them through that journey to get them to buy. And whether that is like you having a little kid with a lemonade stand down the corner, or whether that's an Instagram ad that pops up every time someone's searching for leaky window or leaky sink in the faucet, if you're a plumber or whatever. So one thing I'm really proud of is that I've worked with just about every industry at this point in the past 20 years, and I've done the mom and pop business from like the pizzeria down the corner all the way up to, a Fortune 50 business, which are some of the clients I have today. And I think that what they all have in common is they're all trying to go forward. So that's what I would say to folks is like, don't get overwhelmed by this stuff. Like start small, start with just one thing, and one thing's easy to go to 2, and then 2 to 3. And then before you know it, it's compound interest, right? Before you know it, it just keeps compounding. I think a lot of times people, business owners specifically, they're like, hey, I'm really good at making this thing or doing this thing. I don't know anything about the sales marketing stuff. Well, you got to learn a little bit about it because you're going to need to hire smart people to do it with you or for you. And, that's where I would start with that, just to make sure that I'm not kind of going too smart for my own good.
Yeah, that's solid advice. And also knowing where your clients are. I've worked with small business owners that are paying ungodly amounts of money every month. And I'm like, your audience doesn't even go to that event. Like, why are you sponsoring this event? That's not your target audience. But again, we're business owners. We don't know what we don't know. So getting that guidance, learning, there's plenty of books, videos, things like that out there. So I can't believe we're almost out of time. So I want to give you the fair chance. You talked about all these resources you have, and go ahead, and how can people contact you, get in touch with you, find the resources? How can they do that?
Yeah. So a couple things for folks here. So like, I'm going to ask you, the listener, to first figure out what bucket you're in, right? So if you want to learn more about how to grow your business, if you want to hear some real stories of how to grow your business, I have a free newsletter on my website, petesena.com. I'm not going to sell you anything in that. It's just a free newsletter. I put it out. It's kind of like my inner way of clarifying my thoughts, right? If you're a business owner and you're not journaling or keeping tabs on it, you're going to want to do that, because there's nothing more gratifying than going back and realizing, wow, look how far I've come.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's a really good exercise. And I like to do it out for the world to see. So that's petesena.com. I talk a lot about marketing and branding and business on Twitter and Medium. Also, Pete Sena is the channel for that. If you're looking to understand and see some of the case studies of the businesses that I've grown with my teams, and I've got amazing, incredible teams that run these businesses, you can head on over to digitalsurgeons.com. I'm sure you'll pop in your show notes, but digitalsurgeons.com is where the agency kind of features some of the casework that they do and that sort of thing. But really what I would say in terms of resources, right, is, just if you're looking to learn something specifically, just shoot me a tweet, just be like, hey, Pete, I'm looking to learn more about X or Y. I've got a ton of things that I can point you to that you can get free access to, free information on. One of the things I just started doing recently for somebody is like putting together a whole book of chat GPT prompts, because people are like, how do I use this chat GPT stuff to be better at it? Because some of the clients we've done, we've automated half their business with this stuff, tools like that. Cause obviously there's some limitations to the chat GPT, but everyone knows about it now, right? Or almost everybody. So yeah, I would say that those are the channels that you can mostly find me on. And then I'm pretty responsive on Twitter or LinkedIn. What I would say is that's the core. Those are the core channels to find me on.
All right. So any last words of wisdom before we sign off here? You've given a lot. So if you're...
I appreciate that. I would say don't chase money, chase fulfillment. Ooh. Because the money will come. And I think one thing that I've seen go well and go poorly over the years is it's easy to burn out when you're chasing a goal, when you're chasing a dollar, when you're chasing a thing. It's a lot easier to keep going when you realize business is a marathon, not a sprint. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that you finish the marathon is by pacing yourself, which means you got to take care of yourselves. You got to take care of your family. I know a lot of people who went all in on work, they didn't take care of themselves. And, some of them aren't here anymore. They got sick, they dropped dead, they got divorced, they got unhappy, whatever. So I would say the thing that keeps me going is self-care, being present, investing in yourself, and most importantly, knowing yourself, right? If you want to build a business more than just you, if you want to build a team, you got to have self-awareness, right? Yeah. I spent way too long learning the hard skills like coding and designing and this program and that program. I spent way too long not thinking about soft skills, how to have empathy, how to have self-awareness, how to lead, right? What is EQ, right? Emotional quotient, way more important than IQ, right? People don't care how smart you are. People don't care how talented you are. They care that you can make them more talented. They care that you can push them forward. So those are things I took a long time to learn. So I would say if you're going to invest in yourself, invest in your future self, not just your current self. So that's what I would say, just that. That's been useful and actionable for me. Again, everyone's journey is different, but I hope that's helpful for you in the audience.
Absolutely. That's beautifully said. And no one said it on our show yet. So you are the pioneer of that
Thanks, man.
So I
to hear
appreciate you again. Please go find Pete on the internet. He is full of nuggets today and in the future. So we will sign off here and we'll see you around.
Sounds good. Take care.
So at the end of each show, I like to recap our guest, today's Pete, message to us, and then also give some free business coaching. So you kind of see the value of a business coach or a mentor for your business. And today we talked about several things, but one that I have found that every successful business owner does or has is either a business coach mentor and reading. So I mentioned Learn to Earn. I have several books. So my coaching challenge to you today, the coaching moment, is to pick up a book or an Audible now, as soon as you quit listening to this podcast, and get it on your plate. And before our next show or episode airs, to have read that book or listened to it, to learn something. Learn to Earn. Every successful business owner, again, learns. They learn every day. So I'm going to give you a few suggestions of my top reads in a couple of areas of business. So if you're having difficulty in sales, like Pete said, he just hated sales, blah, blah, blah. So Jeffrey Gitomer's, I believe I'm saying that right, The Little Red Book of Sailing. It's an oldie, but a goodie. It's simple to read, simple to execute. There's nothing difficult in there. If you want the all-time, where most of business frameworks, templates, suggestions, all that stuff starts, Napoleon Hill. If you haven't read that, Think and Grow Rich, that's a great book. If you're overcoming doubts, need to, or doubters, mindset, things like that, Kara Golden, Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. She's the founder and CEO of Hint, actually former CEO now. She is, Hint Water is the unsweetened flavored water. Fantastic. In fact, she's going to be on our podcast very soon. E-Myth Revisited. So the Revisited is just revised, basically. So it's by Michael Gerber. It's the #1 small business book in the world. Over 2 million copies have been sold. In fact, the slogan on it is Why Most Small Businesses Don't Work and What to Do About It. If you're having a hard time with time management, cannot go wrong with Brian Tracy. My very first coach, which his book is next, I'm going to refer. He recommended this book to me. This is for anyone that has problems with procrastination. Is that you? It's most business owners. So it's called Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. 21 great ways to stop procrastinating and get more done in less time. If cash flow, financials is a burden on you, if you're using your bank account to determine the health of your business, you need to read this book. It explains in simplified, easy to read words what the financials are, what they're used for, and how to utilize them and implement them in your business. It's called The Profit Problem. It's by my very first coach years ago, Martin Holland. And on the front of it, it says, I think you can relate to this. It says, they say I make money, so why don't I have any? If marketing is an issue, this is my last recommendation. Donald Miller, Marketing Made Simple. He's the author of the #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller, Building a Story Brand. This is another simplified, easy to read book that you can implement and take action on today. So my challenge to you is to pick up one of these books today and read it or listen to it and implement it. Don't just read it, but implement something from that book before our next podcast. We'll see you soon.
You've been listening to Small Business Pivots. A lot of small business owners are feeling stuck, bogged down, barely making ends meet. But it's Michael's passion to help you change all of it. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten some useful advice from it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on YouTube at Business Ownership Simplified. See you next time on Small Business Pivots.